Our next topic is about other measures of intelligence, specifically tests for individual administration. And will be reported by yours truly and Miss Janine Rosete and Miss Bea Cetera. For our topic outline, first, we will discuss what is test for individual administration. Second, why is there a test needed to be individually administered? Third, how does a test for an individual administered? Fourth, example of test that is individually administered. And last, advantages and disadvantages of a test for individual administration. Now, we will be discussing some definition for individual administration. So, it is according to Anastasi 1988. A test can be said an individual test in the sense that they can be administered to only one person at a time. At dahil it can only be administered to only one person at a time, the examiners can pay more attention to the examinee. Next, many of the individual tests require responses from the examinee or require the manipulation of the materials. Next, it is done by specially trained examiners, and the examiners can easily encourage the examinee and observe his behavior during the test carefully. So, bakit nga ba may mga tests for individual administration? Because the answer for this is there are special populations who cannot be effectively and adequately examined with traditional instruments. And these special populations are, first is the infant and preschool. So in infant and preschool testing, all tests designed for infants and preschool children require individual administration. Most tests for children below the age of 6 are either performance or oral tests. A few involve manipulation of paper and pencil. Moreover, Anastasi emphasized that the first 5 years of existence are likely to be divided into the infant period and preschool period, which will be further discussed later. And the other special populations is the physically handicapped persons. Ito na yung further explanation na sinasabi ko kanina. So, first is for the infant period, it is from birth to the age of approximately 18 months. In here, infants must be tested while either lying down or supported on a person's lap. Next is speech is of little use in giving instructions, although the child's own language development provides relevant data. Examiner serves primarily as a means of providing stimulus objects, and many of the tests deals with sensory motor development, such as infant's ability to lift his or her head, turn over, read for and grasp objects, and follow a moving object with the eye. While in the preschool, the child is expected to walk, sit at a table, and use his or her hands in manipulating test objects and communicate by language, expected to be much more responsive to the examiner as a person. And lastly, for the handicapped person, testing who are physically handicapped have received some attention over several decades. And with this being said, special efforts to meet these problems were stimulated by legislature through the provision of suitable education for all physically handicapped children covered by the Education for All Handicapped Children Act. And that's it for my for the special populations. Next is ito yung mga example ng mga individual administered test before. So first is performance test. Ang performance test, it involved the manipulation of objects with a minimal use of paper and pencil. Ang language test naman, the instructions for this test can be given by demonstration and gesture. Require no language in the part of either examiner or examinee. Next is non-verbal test, also designated as non-reading test. Most tests for the primary school and school children fall into this category, as do tests for illiterate and non-reader at any age level. While requiring no reading or writing, these tests make wide use of oral instructions and communication on the part of examiner. And they usually measure verbal comprehension, such as vocabulary and the understanding of sentences and short paragraphs, though the use of pictorial material supplemented with oral instructions to accompany each item. And lastly, these nonverbal tests would be unsuited for foreign-speaking or deaf persons. And that's it for my report. Thank you and have a good day.
Good day again, everyone. I am here to continue and give example about the tests that are individually administered. So there are tests that individually administered. There are many tests, but these two are the most common use individual test administration for for testing intelligence, for measuring intelligence. Those are Stanford-Binet test and the Wechsler intelligence scale. So at the end of this discussion, we are going to note the examples of tests that are individually administered. So test for individual administration is a psychological test that is given to one subject at a time. It is considered to be the most effective way of testing an individual's intellectual ability. So administering individual tests requires oral response from the examinee. These require careful oral questioning or close observation of responses. So individual test administration is carried out preferably by psychologists in clinic, hospitals, and other settings where clinical diagnoses are made. So, it was mentioned na kanina kung para kanino itong individual tests that are individually administered. So, usually, these tests are used to predict or to assess cognitive disability and to measure intelligence. So, the first of those individual tests is the Stanford-Binet test. So this Stanford-Binet test is already discussed from the previous reporter. So I'm just going to show some pictures and ideas kung ano yung gina-measure nitong test na to. So these tests require a direct question and answer test. So Stanford-Binet test is good at assessing the learning abilities, assessing intellectual strength and weaknesses. So these tests also help to determine and diagnose students with cognitive disability. So that figure na nasa slide, nasa PowerPoint na nakapresent is an example of the questions or figures na nasa Stanford-Binet test. So, as already mentioned kanina, Stanford-Binet test measure different cognitive abilities. It includes visual spatial processing, quantitative reasoning, fluid reasoning, knowledge, and the working memory or the short-term memory. And also, this is the figure below is the IQ range. Kung saan yung chronological age divided by the mental age times 100 is equal to the IQ of the person na nag-take ng test. And yung sa kabila niya naman na side is the classification. If yung score niya is from 90 to 109, then the IQ classification of the individual is in the average. So the latest Stanford-Binet test is the Stanford-Binet Scale 5th edition. So this edition is given through an approved proctor at a quiet location. So the test can take anywhere from 45 minutes to close to 3 hours depending on the person taking the test. So this SB5 is believed to give specially sensitive and accurate results. So it is also a favorable among children because the test features colorful artworks, toys, and manipulatives. So as you can see from the previous presentation or the figure in there is that colorful yung mga figures doon. Yes, colorful. So tests that are individually administered by an experts such as this one are considered the most reliable and effective. So of course, if this test is reliable and effective kasi nga ginagamit siya ng mga professionals and ng experts. So the next example of tests that are individually administered is the Wechsler Intelligence Scale. So the figure at the left side of the slide or the presentation is the different phases of Wechsler Intelligence Scale sa different na gina-measure niya na edad. So, Wechsler IQ test is a test that helps to measure cognitive abilities and intelligence. So, the purpose of the Wechsler IQ test is to identify intelligence and cognitive performance. So, which is often helpful in identifying intellectual disabilities and overall cognitive function in children and adults. So, Wechsler is used usually to measure kung gaano ba ka-intelligent yung isang person and kung gaano yung performance niya. But also, using those results, ma-identify din yung mga cognitive intellectual disabilities na nasa person na nag-take ng test. So, this Wechsler Intelligence Scale is already discussed, yung psychometric properties niya from the previous reporters. So, also, this Wechsler Intelligence Scale measure different composite indexes. So, yes, there are verbal comprehension index, visual spatial index, fluid reasoning index, working memory index, and processing speed. So the most common Wechsler Intelligence Scales are the Wechsler Preschool and Primary Scale of Intelligence for preschool students, Wechsler Intelligence Scale for children, and the Wechsler Adult Intelligence Scale. So the Wechsler and Wechsler Preschool and Primary Scale of Intelligence is a measure of intelligence and cognitive development for young children. So the test is designed primarily for children between the ages of 4 and 6.5, though some of the subtests can be used for children as young as 2.5 and up to just over 7.5 years old. So these subtests are those indexes na nabanggit kanina. So according dito sa Wechsler, there are different many tests. So if we have only 3 na gustong i-measure, then merong test na yung 3 lang mismo na indexes yung gina-measure niya. And then pwede yun yung gamitin ng isang tao. Of course, mas mura na siya. Mas lesser na yung payment niya for that because hindi naman yung full scale ang gina-measure. Pero it is reliable and effective. The next scale is the Wechsler Intelligence Scale for children, of course, for children. So this test is administered lasts between 45 to 65 minutes, but can be shorter or longer depending on the procedures used and the number of indices tested. So these tests are used to generate the IQ score, officially referred to now as a full scale IQ. So sa Wechsler Intelligence Scale, yung parang yung pinaka-reach niya na score, ang tawag doon is full scale IQ. So this test is administered to the children ages between 6 to 16. So this is the interpretation from the right side of the presentation. If the individual scores have the IQ of 115 to 125, then the interpretation of that score is that the children or the person who take the test has a mildly gifted person. If yung person naman is nag-score ng 145 to 157, then that person is highly gifted. So the figure from the in the left side is yung mukha ng isang Wechsler Intelligence Scale for children. So the next is the Wechsler Adult Intelligence Scale. So this scale is used to measure the adults from 16 to 75 years. So this test is approximately administered 1 hour na matapos siya. So the Wechsler Intelligence Scale or WAIS provides 4 individual indexes. Index score for the major components of intelligence, which are the verbal comprehension index, perceptual reasoning index, working memory index, and the processing speed index. So that figure in the right side show na yung mga indexes belong mga subtests belong those indexes. And at the left side naman is that gina-show niya yung figure or yung muka ng isang Weiss scale. So aside from those Wechsler intelligence scales, there are also other intelligence scales kung saan gina-measure niya yung ibang parte na parang iba't ibang combination ng mga indexes. So from katulad nitong WASI or WASI, the Wechsler Abbreviated Scale of Intelligence. It is a short form IQ test used for people from the ages of 6 to 89. Unlike the full form Wechsler IQ test, the WASI consists of only two subtests, vocabulary and the matrix reasoning, and will provide a full-scale intelligence quotient in about 15 minutes. So 15 minutes lang siya, matatapos na yung scale. And additional is the Weiss RNI, the Wechsler Adult Intelligence Scale revised as a neuropsychological instrument or for neurological instrument. So it is a test that has been revised to provide scores with separate norms for people with and without brain injury. So it measures the people with brain and without brain injuries. So and then the lastly is the WIAT, parang ganon. So, the Wechsler Intelligence Assessment Scale. So, it is designed for academic use to help identify academic skills. It is often used in schools for educational placement and identification of learning disability. So, yes, those are some of the examples of the tests that are individually administered. And these are my references. Thank you so much.
So here we have the advantages and disadvantages of a test for individual administration. So let's review first what is individual testing. As said by previous reporter, then it is a test of intelligence administered by one individual at a time. The test in this case requires more verbal responses in order to examine the individual. The qualities of an individual are calculated on an individual level. This kind of test is conducted in places like hospitals, clinics, psychologists, or the places where a diagnosis is done mainly. So first, let us discuss the advantages of individual administration. First is more attention is paid. As the test is done on each individual one by one, the examinee is able to pay more attention towards the person. So, mas matututukan ng examinee yung individual. Due to proper attention, the results also come out to be great, and it is beneficial both sa individual at para rin sa examinee. Number 2, or the second advantages, is the behavior can be observed easily. The examinee gets more time to know the individual as the individual is examined individually. More attention could be given to them, and it is possible din para sa examinee to know the behavior or malaman yung galaw ng individual. By knowing the behavior of an individual, posible na manipulate and get the results as expected ng examinee. Third is that the examinee can easily convince and encourage the person. The examinee in the case of individual testing can encourage and convince the individual. By this manner, the individual can be encouraged and the right path could be shown to him or her. So, makonsider din ito na advantages ng individual administration. Fourth is the results are accurate. The results that come out by use of the individual testing process are accurate compared sa group testing. Maraming places mas prefer nila yung individual testing kaysa sa group testing kasi nagbibigay ito ng mas accurate na resulta, and then results are coming from and examined from depth. So fifth, the results and the scores are not dependent. The results of the individual testing are not dependent on any factors, and this is not only delivers result in a quick manner, but it also helps in getting accurate, which is useful para sa future. Also, the results are made proper scrutiny by the examinee, so those are not dependent on any external factor. Sixth advantage is the speed is one additional factor. As a result are not dependent on any external factors, pagkatapos ng examine, the examiner gives the result on the spot, which is an added advantage. The person does not need to wait for the required result, so the result is given is an added factor compared mo sa group test. The efficiency is way better than any other methods as the 7 disadvantages. As the tests are conducted on an individual level, yung efficiency is ought to be great because yung lahat ng attention ay nabibigay sa isang individual. This is not possible in case of the group test, so it is also one of the advantages of individual administration. Eighth is more time to understand the person. As the individual is in direct contact with the examinee gets more time to know the person. So, habang yung individual is malapit or direct contact ka sa examinee, mas makikilala niya pa yung person. And to be very accurate, the examinee gets to know the individual on a personal level. So, kaya makonsider ito na isa sa advantages ng individual administration. So, the disadvantages of a test for individual administration, here we have 4 disadvantages. And then, if individual testing has some advantages, syempre, meron din namang mga disadvantages. Nowadays, many places prefer group testing but it highly depends sa type ng lugar. For example, if it is a clinic, it is obvious to have individual testing. Still, some of the disadvantages are follows. First is it is time-consuming. The individual testing is time-consuming. It is because each and every individual has to be taken account into during the test, and one individual can take as much time as needed to. So the process is quite lengthy and time-consuming. So yun nga, mag-consume siya ng mahabang oras. Second is trained and experienced examiner is required. For such individual test, the experienced and trained examiners are required. So kumbaga hindi naman pwede na sino-sino lang na staff or examiners ang dapat mag-handle ng individual sa isang test. Dapat talaga yung mga qualified and experienced staff yung mag-handle. Yun nga, at the same time, it is difficult to have the staff which is equally qualified and has the experience which is required for conducting the test. So third is it costs more than other procedures. As the test is conducted at an individual level, for every individual stationary is required, it is written test is not conducted, then it might be verbal. Still, for verbal test, it also lots of energy goes, especially when done on an individual level. Questioning every individual and knowing the problems of every individual is a big task para sa examinee. So, it forms one of the disadvantages ng individual administration. The last disadvantages is the lots of money and investment is required. So, kailangan talaga ng medyo malaking capital and investment as an individual to be examined kasi more staff is needed, and for the same, the investment also needs to be more with the company. The cycle is providing salaries at the same time providing service sa mga individual needs to flow in an undeterred manner. So for that to take place, the company needs proper funds and capital. However, it becomes an expensive process to take place. So that's it for the advantages and disadvantages of individual administration.